The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the narrow dirt paths of Malapit into rivers of mud. The wind howled through the coconut trees, bending their trunks low as if in submission to some unseen force. Inside his small, weathered home, Tata Selmo sat by the flickering light of an oil lamp, his gnarled fingers tracing the pages of an old leather-bound book filled with prayers and remedies. The storm outside was fierce, but the Albularyo had lived through many like it. This was nothing new, or so he thought. A sharp knock at the door startled him. At first he wondered if it was just the wind rattling the loose bamboo panels. But then it came again, 3 deliberate raps, too precise to be the work of the storm. Tata Selmo frowned. No one in their right mind would be out in this weather. Setting the book aside, he rose slowly, his bones aching with the dampness in the air. He grabbed the lampina, small cloth charm tied around his wrist end, muttered a quick prayer before pulling the door open. The sight before him made his breath hitch. A family stood on his porch, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his clothes soaked through. A woman beside him, her long hair clinging to her face like wet seaweed. And 2 children, a boy and a girl, their wide eyes gleaming in the dim light. They looked exhausted, their skin pale, their lips tinged blue from the cold. But it wasn't just the storm that had brought them here. Tata Selmo could feel it. Something was off. "Ta-ta," the man said, his voice deep but oddly smooth, like oil over water. "We're caught in the flood. Our house, ... It's gone. We have nowhere else to go." The Albularyo hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to shut the door, to turn them away. But years of healing, of helping those in need, made him push the unease aside. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The family shuffled inside, water dripping from their clothes onto the wooden floor. The woman smiled at him, but there was something unnatural about the way her lips stretched too wide, too many teeth. The children stayed close to their parents, their movements eerily synchronized. The boy, no older than 10, kept his gaze fixed on Tata Selmo, unblinking. "Sit by the fire," Tata Selmo instructed, gesturing to the small hearth where embers still glowed. "I'll make some salabat to warm you." As he moved toward the kitchen, he caught a glimpse of their shadows cast against the wall by the lamplight. The man's shadow seemed to ripple, as if it were alive. The woman's stretched longer than it should have, her fingers elongating into something claw-like. The children's shadows didn't move at all. They stayed perfectly still, even as the kids shifted on their feet. Tata Selmo's hands trembled as he poured hot water into cups, stirring in ginger and honey. He had heard stories of coarse whispers of Aswang families who traveled during storms, seeking shelter in the homes of the unsuspecting. They would play the part of weary travelers, only to reveal their true nature once the household was asleep. He needed to be careful. Returning to the main room, he handed out the cups. The family accepted them gratefully, but their fingers brushed against his in a way that made his skin crawl too cold, too deliberate. The woman's nails, he noticed, were long and yellowed, like talons. "Where are you from?" Tata Selmo asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The next barrio over," the man replied.
"Out."
The river swallowed half the houses. Tata Selmo nodded. Though he knew Sanlagan had no river, it was a landlocked village. The lie confirmed his fears. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. The lamp flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. For a brief moment, in the unstable light, the man's eyes seemed to glow red. "Should rest," Tata Selmo said, forcing a smile. "The storm will pass by morning." The family thanked him, their voices smooth, their smiles too perfect. As they retreated to the spare room, Tata Selmo waited, listening. The house creaked, the rain pounded, and beneath it all soft, wet sounds. The sound of something licking its lips. He knew then that he had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn them away now. The night stretched on, the storm raging outside, while inside, something far worse waited in the dark. The moment the door to the spare room clicked shut, Tata Selmo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air in the house felt heavier now, thick with something beyond the dampness of the storm, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He turned the wick of the oil lamp lower, casting the room into a dim, flickering gloom. Shadows stretched long and twisted along the walls, their edges wavering like living things. He told himself it was just the wind, just the storm playing tricks on the light. But the knot in his stomach tightened all the same. He moved quietly, his bare feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor, as he retreated to his own room. The door creaked as he closed it behind him, the sound too loud in the unnatural silence of the house. He pressed his ear against the rough wood, listening. At first there was nothing but the distant rumble of thunder and the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Then a whisper, too soft to make out the words, but the cadence was wrong. It wasn't the murmur of people settling in for the night. It was something else, something that slithered between words, something that curled around the edges of human speech and twisted it into something else entirely. Selmo's fingers tightened around the lamp on his wrist. He had seen things in his years as an Albularyo spirits that clung to the sick, curses that festered in the bones of the dead, but Aswang were different. They weren't just creatures of the night, they were hunters, and they were in his home. Floorboard groaned in the hallway. He held his breath. The sound was too close, too deliberate. Someone or something was moving just outside his door. He could almost picture them standing there, their shadows stretching beneath the gap in the wood, their breath slow and measured as they listened for him in return. The air grew colder, the scent of wet earth and something faintly metallic seeping through the cracks. Blood, no older than that, rot. The kind that clung to things that had been buried too long and dug up too soon. Then laughter. It was soft, muffled, like a child trying to stifle giggles under a blanket. But there was nothing playful about it. The sound skittered down his spine, sharp and wrong. The children. He had thought them quiet, unnervingly so, but now they were laughing. And beneath it a wet clicking noise, like teeth tapping together, like something sharp being dragged across bone. He needed to see. Moving as silently as he could, he knelt and pressed his eye to the narrow gap where the door didn't quite meet the floor. The hallway was dark, but the faintest sliver of moonlight bled through the shuttered windows, painting the wooden planks in streaks of silver. For a moment, there was nothing. Then movement. A shadow detached itself from the deeper blackness near the spare room, slinking low to the ground. It was too small to be the man or the woman, one of the children, but the way it moved, it wasn't right. The limbs were too long, the joints bending in ways they shouldn't. It paused, head tilting. And Selmo's blood turned to ice as he realized it was in tea. Looking down the hallway, it was looking at him. The thing's eyes caught the light, glinting like wet stones in a riverbed. He jerked back, heart hammering against his ribs. The laughter came again, louder now, and this time it was joined by a new sound, a low, guttural crooning. The mother. Her voice was sweet, almost melodic, but the words were in no language he recognized. They curled through the house like smoke, wrapping around the walls, seeping into the cracks. A chant, call. Something scratched at his door. Not a knock, not the wind. Claws, dragging slowly down the wood, leaving thin, splintered grooves in their wake. Selmo's breath came in short, panicked bursts. He fumbled for the small pouch beneath his pillow salt, crushed ginger, a sliver of banka wood carved with old symbols. Protection. But would it be enough? The scratching stopped. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper so close he could feel the breath of it against his skin. Tata, we know you're awake. The voice was the little girl's. But it wasn't a child's voice. Not anymore. It was layered, distorted, as if something else were speaking through her. Selmo clenched his fists, the charms biting into his palm. He had let them in. And now, as the storm raged outside and the night deepened, he realized with dawning horror that the real storm had only just begun inside his own home. The whispers grew louder, shadows shifted, and somewhere beneath the house, something began to dig. The first gray light of dawn had never taken so long to arrive. Selmo sat rigid on the edge of his bed, his fingers still clenched around the charms in his palm, the impressions of the carved symbols pressed deep into his skin. The whispers had stopped just before sunrise, not fading, not drifting away, but cutting off abruptly, as if a door had been slammed shut on the other side. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting. He forced himself to stand, his knees protesting, his back stiff from hours of unmoving tension. The house felt different, now not empty, but staged. The spare room door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness within. The floorboards where he'd seen the child creature crouching were unmarked. No scratches, no sign of anything unnatural having passed through, but the air. The air still carried that faint, clinging scent of turned earth and old blood. Moving quietly, he made his way to the kitchen. The fire had burned down to embers, but he didn't dare stoke it back to life. Instead, he reached beneath the worn wooden counter, his fingers finding the hidden compartment he'd built years ago, back when the nightmares first started coming to him in waking visions. The leather-wrapped bundle was still there, the herbs inside crackling dry as he unfolded them. Luyang-dila roots, blackened at the tips from last year's blessing. Sambong leaves, brittle but still pungent, at the center, wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from a priest's vestment. The most important item of all, a sliver of mirror. Its edges blackened by candle smoke, its surface etched with symbols that weren't quite letters. The mirror caught the dim light as he lifted it, throwing strange reflections across the walls. He didn't need to look into it, not yet. Just holding it made his pulse quicken. This was forbidden knowledge, even for an Albularyo. Asta, the old priest in the next town, had warned him years ago about calling upon certain truths. Some things, the man had said, his voice gone thin with fear, should stay hidden in the dark. A floorboard creaked behind him. Tata Selmo didn't turn. He didn't need to. The reflection in the kitchen's rain-streaked window showed the doorway filling with a shadow too tall to be the man, too thin to be the woman, stood perfectly still watching him. "You're up early, Tata." The voice was the father's, but the tone was all wrong to smooth, too amused. Like a cat watching a wounded bird struggle. Tata Selmo slipped the mirror into his pocket, the cold weight of it pressing against his thigh. "The storm kept me awake," he said, keeping his voice steady as he turned. The man, if it was still a man, stood, framed in the doorway, his smile showing just a few too many teeth. Right. Behind him, the hallway was empty. But the shadows there seemed thicker than they should be, pooling in the corners like spilled ink. "We were just talking about how grateful we are for your hospitality," the man continued, stepping forward. His movements were too fluid, his bare feet making no sound on the floor. "My wife was saying we should repay you. No need." Tata Selmo edged sideways, putting the table between them. The charms in his other hand felt suddenly inadequate. "The storm will pass soon. You'll be on your way by afternoon." The man's smile widened. "Will we?" Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. But beneath it, barely audible, came another sound, a wet, rhythmic scraping, like something digging. The man's head tilted, his nostrils flaring as if catching a scent. "You have something of ours, Tata?" "Tata." Selmo's blood went cold. The mirror, they knew. A giggle floated from the hallway. Hitched, delighted. The children were awake. "We always know," the man whispered, his eyes gone black from edge to edge. "We always find what's ours." The scraping beneath the house grew louder. Tata Selmo gripped the Luyang-dila roots tighter, their sharp edges biting into his palm. He had one chance. One gambit left. The old priest's warning echoed in his mind. Some things should stay hidden in the dark. But dawn had come, and the things in his house weren't hiding anymore. The first rule of dealing with the unseen was simple: never let them know you were afraid. Fear had a scent, thick and metallic, and Tata Selmo could feel it clinging to his skin now. Sour on his tongue as he forced himself to meet the black-eyed gaze of the thing wearing a man's face. The digging beneath the house had stopped the moment he'd tightened his grip on the roots. But the silence left behind was worse, a held breath waiting to be exhaled. "You mistake me for someone who doesn't know what walks his own home," Tata Selmo said, his voice steadier than he felt. The mirror in his pocket burned like ice against his thigh. The man, the Aswang, laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "Old healer, you invited us in. That makes your blood as much ours as the girls we took from the next village." A fresh wave of revulsion tightened Tata Selmo's throat. So that was why they'd come so far in the storm, not fleeing but hunting. The missing child from Sanlagan hadn't been taken by floodwaters after all. Movement flickered in the hallway behind the creature, the woman now. Her long fingers curled around the doorframe, her nails dark and crusted. The children pressed against her legs, their faces half hidden in the folds of her skirt, but their eyes gleamed with the same unnatural hunger. The Albularyo had seconds to decide. He threw the Luyang de la roots onto the table between them. They landed with a thud, rolling to reveal the blackened tips not from age, but from being dipped in holy oil and set aflame during last year's Pista ng San Isidro. The reaction was instant. The man recoiled, hissing, his too wide mouth twisting in pain or rage. The woman let out a shriek that shook the rafters, her children scrambling back into the shadows. Tata Selmo didn't wait. He bolted for the back door, the wooden planks shuddering underfoot as something heavy, something wrong lunged after him. The morning air hit his face like a slap, the storm's aftermath leaving the world dripping in gray. He didn't look back as he sprinted for the tree line, the charms around his wrist bouncing, the mirror a deadly weight in his pocket. Behind him, the house groaned, the very walls seeming to bend inward as the things inside shed their human skins. A guttural howl split the dawn, not the wind, not any animal he knew. The sound drove him faster, his sandals slipping in the mud as he crashed through the underbrush. Branches whipped at his arms, drawing blood, but the pain was distant, unimportant. What mattered was the santal tree ahead, its trunk twisted with age, its roots cradling the hollow where he'd buried the other half of his protection years ago. Fingers long, jointed wrong, grabbed at his shirt from behind. Tata Selmo twisted, slamming the mirror into the reaching limb. The creature screamed, sound shattering the morning stillness as the reflection caught it, not the man-shape it wore now, but the true form beneath. Elongated jaw, needle teeth, eyes like pits, leading down into the earth. The thing recoiled, clutching its arm where the skin smoked and blackened. He didn't pause to see if it followed. Dropping to his knees at the base of the santal tree, he dug frantically with his bare hands, the damp earth giving way to reveal a clay jar sealed with wax. The moment his fingers closed around it, the forest behind him erupted with movement, not just the family now, but the shadows themselves seeming to writhe, to reach. The Albularyo broke the seal. Inside, wrapped in banana leaves gone brittle with time, was a knife not steel, but bone, its edge serrated with tiny, precise teeth. His grandfather's last gift, his legacy. As the first of the children burst from the brush, its mouth unhinging like a snake's, Tata Selmo turned, the bone knife catching the pale morning light. "You should have left at dawn," he whispered, and the forest was no longer silent. The bone knife tasted blood before the sun had fully risen above the trees thick, blackish fluid that sizzled where it struck the damp earth. The child thing screeched when the blade found its throat, the sound too high, too shrill to be human, before it collapsed into a twitching heap of limbs that seemed to fold in on itself like a dying spider. Tata Selmo didn't watch the transformation complete. He was already moving, the ancient weapon humming in his grip as the forest erupted around him. Shadows detached from the trees, taking form the mother first, her human guise sloughing away like rotten fruit skin to reveal the elongated horror beneath, arms stretching too far, fingers ending in hooked talons that scraped grooves into the bark as she came for him. He sidestepped, the bone knife flashing upward. It caught her across the ribs, and the wound didn't bleed so much as split, peeling open like overripe fruit to reveal not muscle and bone but a hollow, squirming darkness inside. She howled, the sound shaking droplets from the leaves, and for a heartbeat, Tata Selmo saw the truth of her not, a creature wearing a woman's shape, but something older, something that had simply forgotten it had ever been anything else. Then the father was on him. The impact drove the air from Tata Selmo's lungs, slamming him back against the santal tree. The bone knife skittered away into the undergrowth as the thing pinned him, its breath hot and rancid against his face, its eyes black pits that seemed to swallow the morning light. "You should have fed us," it hissed, the words slithering into his ears like oil. "You should have let us take the girl next door instead." Its mouth unhinged, rows of needle teeth glistening, a guttural chant cut through the clearing. The Aswang froze, its head snapping toward the sound. Tata Selmo twisted, gasping, to see a line of figures emerging from the mist-draped path to the barrio villagers, their faces grim in the gray light, each holding something in their hands. Garlic strung on hemp cords, crude wooden crosses. In one case, an old bolo knife etched with clumsy prayers. At their heads stood Mancardo, the rice farmer, His normally jovial face set in hard lines as he swung a clay pot of smoking incense in wide, deliberate arcs. The scent camphor and blessed salt hit Tata Selmo's nose like a physical blow. And the Aswang recoiled with a shriek, its claws raking the air as it stumbled back from him. "We heard the screams," Moncardo said, hauling Tata Selmo upright with one calloused hand. His grip was shaking. "The whole barrio felt it like something walking on our graves. The remaining Aswang's mother and father now. The children's crumpled forms already dissolving into blackened vines hissed from the tree line, their shapes flickering between human and something far worse. But the villagers stood firm, their murmured prayers weaving into a low, constant drone that seemed to press against the creatures like a physical barrier. The father Swang's lips peeled back in a snarl. "Ow! This isn't over, healer. We always come back." Always a rock. Hurled by someone in the crowd, struck it square between the eyes. The thing screamed, clutching its face as the stone a common river pebble. But one Tata Selmo, recognized as being from the creek behind the chapel, smoked, where it touched the creature's skin. The villagers surged forward as one, their makeshift weapons raised, their voices rising in a hymn older than the barrio itself. The Swangs fled, not with the dramatic vanishing of stories, but in a stumbling, furious retreat, their forms blurring at the edges as they dissolved into the trees. The morning light, strengthening now, seemed to scour the shadows clean where they had stood. Silence fell, broken only by the villagers' ragged breathing. Tata Selmo retrieved the bone knife from the ferns, its edge already dulling to harmless ivory. He would have to re-bless it. There were rituals to perform, protections to renew. The barrio would need warnings carved into every doorway, charms hung above every crib. Moncardo clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You'll tell us what to do?" The Albularyo looked toward the trees where the creatures had vanished. Somewhere far off, a bird began to sing the first true sound of morning. "Yes," he said, "but they'll be back." And as the villagers turned toward home, their footsteps quickening at every rustle in the undergrowth, the unspoken truth hung heavier than the storm clouds. Next time, the Aswangs wouldn't bother knocking. The days that followed were filled with rituals, every doorway in the barrio smeared with a paste of crushed garlic and holy water. Every window frame lined with salt that sparkled like ground diamonds in the sunlight. The children were kept indoors after dusk, their mothers whispering prayers as they tied amulets of Palo Santo around their tiny wrists. Tata Selmo moved from house to house, his hands steady despite the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin, his voice hoarse from chanting the old words that tasted of iron and ash on his tongue. But no amount of blessings could erase the stain left on his own home. The villagers had offered to burn it down. Better to lose wood and thatch than risk their presence lingering. Old Manong Ide had insisted, her knotted fingers clutching her rosary like a weapon. But Tata Selmo had refused. The house had been in his family for generations. Its walls held memories older than the fear that now haunted the barrio. And besides, he needed to see what they'd left behind. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not the expected stench of decay or sulfur, but something subtler like wet earth after a long drought. Like the inside of a hollow log where mushrooms grew in damp, spiraling patterns. It clung to the corners of the rooms, thickening near the spare bedroom where the family had slept. The door still stood ajar, just as it had that morning when he'd fled. But the darkness beyond seemed denser now, resistant to the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Tata Selmo lit 3 candles, white for purity, red for protection, black for the seeing of hidden things, and stepped inside. The bed was untouched, the blankets neatly folded, as if no one had ever slept there. But the floor told a different story. Scratches radiated outward from beneath the bed, deep grooves carved into the wood like the marks of some enormous clawed creature trying to dig its way up from below. Kneeling, Tata Selmo ran his fingers along the ridges, stomach turning as he realized they weren't random, they formed symbols. Ancient ones, the kind he'd only seen once before, scrawled in the margins of his grandfather's most forbidden book. Binding marks. A cold sweat broke across his back. The Aswangs hadn't just taken shelter in his home, they'd been anchoring themselves to it, preparing to spread their roots through the barrio like poison through a bloodstream. The candle flames flickered wildly, though no wind stirred the stale air. Something moved under the bed. Selmo froze, his breath catching as a faint. Wet shuffling sound reached his ears, the sound of something dragging itself across wood. Slowly, so slowly, he bent lower, the candles casting their trembling light into the darkness beneath the frame. At first he saw nothing but dust and the occasional spiderweb. Then movement, a patch of shadow thicker than the rest, clinging to the underside of the bed like a leech. As he watched, it pulsed, stretching tendrils outward to trace the grooves of the carved symbols, reinforcing them. They'd left a piece of themselves behind. Seed. The black candle guttered out with a hiss. Selmo backed away, his pulse roaring in his ears. He knew what this meant. The rituals, the charms, the villagers' vigilance, none of it would matter if the anchor remained. The Aswangs could return whenever they pleased, slipping through the cracks like smoke. Outside, a child laughed a normal, human sound that should have been comforting but now sent a fresh wave of dread through him. Because he knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in his gut, that the creatures wouldn't wait for another storm. They would come on a clear night. When everyone had finally stopped watching the shadows, the moon hung heavy and yellow over Malapete, its light staining the rooftops the color of old bones. Selmo stood in the center of his home, bare feet pressed against the scratched wooden floor. The air thick with the scent of crushed herbs and something darker, something metallic. The villagers had offered to stay, to keep watch with their garlic strings and whispered prayers, but he had sent them away. This was not a night for witnesses. The markings beneath the bed had spread. He had discovered it at dusk, thin, vein-like tendrils of shadow creeping outward from the original symbols, branching across the floorboards like cracks in ice. They pulsed faintly, as if breathing, and when he pressed his palm to them, the wood had felt disturbingly warm, live. The piece of themselves the Aswangs had left behind was growing. Ta-ta. Selmo set the bowl on the floor clay, hand-fired, its rim chipped from years of use. Inside, the mixture shimmered black in the moonlight. Crushed sambong leaves. 3 drops of his own blood, and the final ingredient, the one that made his hands shake as he prepared it. A sliver of the bone knife, ground to powder. His grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from memory. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. The first cut was the deepest. He drew the blade across his left palm, hissing as the pain lanced up his arm. Blood welled, thick and dark, dripping into the bowl with a sound like distant rain. The moment it hit the mixture, the shadows on the floor recoiled, the tendrils retracting like burned fingers. A gust of wind from nowhere rattled the shutters, though the night outside was still. The remaining candle flames stretched tall and thin, their light turning an unnatural green before snapping back to normal. From beneath the bed came a sound, not the wet shuffling from before, but a voice guttural. Hungry. You would bargain, little healer? Selmo clenched his bleeding hand. You're bound to this place now, he said, forcing the words past the tightness in his throat. But so am I. Laughter filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, the walls, the floor, the very air vibrating with it. The bowl trembled, the liquid inside rippling though nothing touched it. And what do you offer? He knew the answer. Had known it since he'd seen the first tendril of shadow stretch toward his threshold at sunset. There was only one way to sever an Aswang's anchor. Me, he said. Silence, then movement. The shadows beneath the bed surged, flowing up the legs of the frame like liquid, pooling on the mattress before taking shape. Not the false human forms they'd worn before, but something closer to their true nature. Elongated limbs. Too many joints, faces that were little more than stretched skin over sharp bone. The father creature leaned forward, its breath reeking of spoiled meat. A trade, then. Your life for the barrio's safety. Selmo didn't flinch. Swear it, on the old names. The creature hissed, but after a moment, it nodded. One clawed hand dipped into the bowl, stirring the mixture before bringing it to lipless jaws. We swear. By the dark between stars, by the hunger beneath the earth, this place will be untouched, till your last breath leaves your body. The words settled like a weight around Selmo's ribs. He had bought Malapete, its safety, but the cost. The Aswang's smile split its face ear to ear. We will come for you, healer. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But when you least expect it, it leaned closer, its whisper like insects scuttling inside his skull. And you will welcome us. Then the shadows collapsed inward, the room emptying of their presence as suddenly as a snuffed candle. The scratches on the floor remained, but they were just scratches now, lifeless wood, no different than any other scar left by time. Tata Silno exhaled, his knees buckling as the tension left his body. Outside, the barrio slept on, unaware of the bargain made in their name. He wrapped his bleeding hand, the bandages stark white against his skin. There would be no more rituals now. No more charms. Somewhere in the dark between moments, the Aswangs waited, and Tata Selma would be ready.